All right, welcome everybody. My name's Dave. I'm going to be doing a play-by-play for the next hour or so. If you're not familiar with the play-by-play setup, basically I'll just be kind of narrating the bear activity we see at the falls here. If you hear me stop talking for any length of time, don't worry, that doesn't necessarily mean we've lost connection or lost audio. I'm just kind of enjoying the sights as you are. I'll kind of talk a little bit about some of the individual bears we're seeing, some of their life histories, some of the different things you can use to identify the bears here. And if you're not familiar with Katmai, we're at Brooks Falls in Brooks Camp on the Brooks River. Brooks River is a 1.5 mile short river, connects Neck Neck Lake to Lake Brooks. And like many other rivers in Alaska, it's got a ton of sockeye salmon. What's unique about the Brooks River are the Brooks Falls, where we're at now. The Brooks Falls kind of act as a temporary barrier for the salmon's migration as they migrate from the ocean through the Neck Neck River, through Neck Neck Lake, up Brooks River, and then eventually they'll be getting into these small creeks that will flow into Lake Brooks. They have to stop here at the Brooks Falls as they attempt to clear the falls, and because of that you get really high concentrations of sockeye salmon, and the bears, they come out here every year and capitalize on that. So what's unique is we're able to see the same bears frequently come back year after year. We can monitor them, we can learn a lot about the individuals, and we can learn about the brown bear species as a whole. The other unique thing is Brooks Camp is a developed area. It's the only real developed area in Katmai National Park. So people are welcome to visit Brooks Camp. You can stay in our campground, stay at the lodge. If you're interested in taking a trip out here, I'd recommend checking out our website and our YouTube channel. We've got a lot of really good information on how to get here and things to do, what are some good times to come. So right now we've got two bears, 480 Otis, that's that blonder bear, the bigger one who's just caught a fish, and he's just caught a silver salmon. We've got all 5 Pacific salmon species in the Brooks River. The most dominant fish species, the most numerous, is the sockeye salmon. And right now we're about at the end of the sockeye salmon run. And what we're seeing a lot of bears catch now are the silver salmon. The silver salmon are a little bit bigger than the sockeye. They'll average to be about 10 pounds, where the sockeye will average 5 or 6 pounds. So it's September. What we're seeing is a lot of bears starting to return to the river. In August, many of the bears will move on. They'll follow the sockeye salmon into those small tributary streams into Lake Brooks that I spoke of, where fishing conditions are a little bit better. This year, we had a lot of bears stick around because there's such a large sockeye salmon run, but the bears that did leave, we're starting to see them show up again. 151 is this smaller, darker bear. He's an adult, but he's kind of a young adult. He's about 9 or 10 years old, and he spent pretty much the whole month of August away from the Brooks River and has returned in the last week or so. And as these bears return, we see them again after about a month or maybe a couple weeks being gone. There's some real significant changes in their appearance. Every year bears will grow a new coat, a winter coat, much thicker and much darker. So that's one change you see. You see them change in color. They all get a lot darker. They also get a lot bigger. Bears, they pack on all that weight in the summer for those lean winter months. They can put on up to 2 pounds consistently every single day. So after being gone for just 1 month, they might be 120 pounds heavier, which really shows. So if you're familiar with the play-by-plays, you'll know that I'm not going to necessarily be able to answer individual questions. It's just a little bit too much to multitask while talking and looking and moving the camera around to also be reading questions. I will pop in to discuss periodically and just make sure the feed's okay, make sure everything's on track. And if you do have questions, feel free to ask them there in the chat. You may have other cam viewers that are able to answer them, or I may happen to see them and be able to work that into my little spiel as well. I mentioned earlier that I'm a volunteer park ranger. I'm actually on an internship through the SCA, the Student Conservation Association. If you're a college student yourself or recently graduated and you're interested in working for the Park Service or working for a similar organization, maybe the Forest Service, I would strongly suggest checking out the SCA. It's a really great way to get a foot in the door with those kinds of organizations. The SCA puts, like I said, students or recent graduates, they place them in these paid internships all over the country with the Park Service, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife. And it's a really great way to, number one, to get out and see the country, and number two, it's a really great way to get on the track to being employed with one of those really awesome organizations and start a career within conservation of America's wild lands. But back to the bears, we did see 409 starting to swim up the river with her two spring cubs, and they're out of sight now. I'll be keeping an eye out for them, and if they return, we'll pan over and check them out. That's been another bear, a family group that's returned recently after likely fishing elsewhere during August. Another thing a lot of these bears may have been doing in August, eating berries. It's been a really strong berry year. Up on Dumpling Mountain, there's a ton of blueberries and crowberries and low bush cranberries. And so a lot of the bears might have been capitalizing on those. It really speaks to the intelligence of these animals that, they know to adapt to the different seasons of Alaska. They're following the salmon to their spawning grounds. They're dispersing to seek out more profitable food sources. And of course, they remember to come back year after year, back to the Brooks River, where in September, starting now and throughout October, even into November, the sockeye salmon that have spawned up at Lake Brooks, they start to float back down the river. They really lose a lot of energy after they spawn. They're not eating anything once they hit fresh water, so all their energy is derived from existing fat stores, and eventually that gets depleted. They lose energy, they get really lethargic, and they just start to kind of be swept away with the current, and they float out back into the mouth of the Brooks River where it enters in Neck Neck Lake. And the bears know that. They remember that from previous years, so they come back around September and they start capitalizing on that food source as well. So we're seeing still a lot of salmon jumping the falls. I'm going to zoom out so we can see that. Like I said before, one of the reasons we think that a lot of these bears stuck around in August, which really is very unusual to see so many bears. You know, we could see 4 or 5 bears at the falls fairly consistently during the month of August. One of the reasons for that, the general thought is that, you know, the sockeye salmon run is just so long. Generally, Fish and Wildlife stops counting the salmon that are swimming up the Neck Neck River around July 27th. And that's because by that time, generally the salmon run is finished. But as we saw this year, it was really prolonged. It just kept stretching out. We kept seeing salmon enter the Brooks River. A good average number for the number of sockeye salmon that swim through the Brooks River each year is about 300,000. You know, between 200 and 400,000, so call it 300,000 as a kind of an average, a rough estimate average. You know, this year we're likely to have seen a lot more than that. And a lot of those fish probably aren't going to get counted necessarily because they came through once that counting period ended. So that's one reason that we might have been seeing so many bears in August. Another reason, which was proposed to me actually just earlier today by Mike Fitz, a former ranger of Katmai, is that we might just be seeing a really strong silver run in addition to that. And that big fish we just saw jumping the falls, that was a silver salmon. Silvers, you know, they also turn colors as they spawn, but they don't turn that bright red color. If you see a really bright red fish, that's a sockeye salmon. So I'm going to zoom back in on the star of the show here. And again, if you're joining us late, we're looking at 151 Walker. This is his nickname on that bear. He's looking around in the water, standing up a little bit closer to us, a little darker, a little smaller than the other bear. And that other bear in the far corner, that's 480 Otis. If you're new to Explore.org, you're new to the play-by-play, and you're wondering, you know, how am I identifying these bears? There's a few different ways. Most bears have some kind of distinguishing characteristics. 480 Otis, that's the larger, blonder bear. He's got a really floppy right ear. He's one of the only bears that I've seen that has such a distinctive ear. His right ear just kind of flops over. It doesn't stand up straight like his left ear does. He's really, really fat right now. You know, you can also use some behavioral characteristics. Oh, great. We got another bear just showed up. This is the bear that I saw on the upper river last night. And I believe that this is 89, nicknamed Backpack. This is, again, another bear that's just shown up very recently. And so, like I said before, in August and beginning of September, it's really not very common to be able to see bears at the falls proper. A lot of times, the bears we see along the river, they're walking the river, they're down at the mouth waiting for those sockeye salmon that have already spawned. They got very low energy. Start being washed that direction, they can kind of scavenge down there. I did walk the upper river yesterday in the evening, and I was able to see 128, nicknamed Grazer, with all three of her cubs. So that family is also returned. And it seems that there's a lot of sockeye salmon up near Lake Brooks and up in the upper reaches of the Brooks River. And I think what's happening is a lot of bears are walking that stretch of the river and fishing just in that location. It's not going to be quite as good of fishing conditions as down at the falls, where you can wait for fish to just bump into you. But using the dash and grab like we saw 89 used just a moment ago can still be pretty effective up there. And now we've got 151 successfully catching another silver salmon. So I'd like to watch him eat this salmon, and we'll see if he either eats the whole thing or if he does what we call high grading, where he eats just the most fatty parts of the fish. That'd be the skin, the brain, and then if it's a female fish, the eggs as well. And then I'd like to compare that to see 480 the next time he catches a fish. To see kind of some of the differences in the approach. 480, and I'll zoom out so we can see him as well. 480 is a pretty old bear. He's in his late teens. Bears on average live to be about 20 years old. So he's kind of pushing the upper limits of what a wild brown bear, what their lifespan will be. He's actually missing 2 canine teeth. Makes it pretty difficult for him to peel that skin off and to kind of delicately pick through the fish carcass and get those fatty parts that he wants to get to. He's still perfectly capable of doing it, but it takes him a little bit longer. And as we watch 151 do just that, peel the skin right off, even being a smaller bear, we'll be able to see, by contrast, how much more difficult it is for 480 to do the same thing. So like I mentioned earlier, when these bears come back after being away during August, and even for the bears that stayed, there's a lot of changes. They look like different bears by the time they get back, and you kind of have to go through a whole new process of trying to identify them. I'd give it about a 80%. I'd say I'm 80% sure that the bear that we're looking at here is 89. I'm a little less sure as I watch him, though, because of his behavior. 89 backpack, he's a bear that, he's pretty successful at fishing. And although he does like to try some different spots, he's very adaptable. He'll fit in where he fits in. This bear is he's looking a little bit more inexperienced. He's also, maybe just a little bit smaller than I would have imagined 89 to be as he came back. Not a tiny bear by any stretch. But if you compare him to 151, the bear on the rock eating that silver salmon, they're about the same age. I think they might be 1 year apart. So I just want to watch this new bear and see, if you have any other ideas, maybe you think it's a different bear, enter your thoughts in on Discuss in the chat. And hopefully I'll get a chance to take a glance down, and if not, I'll definitely take a look after the play-by-play is over. So I did just look down at the chat, see a lot of guesses of 503. And the more I look at this bear, of course I get biased when I start hearing other people say who they think it is. It makes me think it's that bear too. But I think that's definitely a good theory. Certainly by the behavior, doesn't seem to match up with 89. The size, just a little bit smaller. I did compare some fall photos of 89 last year to some pictures I took of the bear from last night, and it's definitely the same bear from last night. I'm about 100% sure of that. But we'll have to just continue watching, and maybe we can narrow down our theory more confidently to 503, or maybe to another bear. Regardless of the ID of this bear, what we're watching it do is snorkeling, and it's looking for dead or dying salmon. They might be laying on the bottom of the river. They might just be moving really slowly. When salmon start to die, they'll swim in the water, but their energy is just so low, you can walk right up to them. You can almost just pick them up out of the water, and they don't really try to get away at a certain point. Again, they're not eating anything, the salmon, once they hit fresh water, so at a certain point they just run out of their existing energy store and begin to die. So time's flying by for me. I'm already almost 30 minutes into this play-by-play. I'll just reintroduce myself. My name's Dave. I'm a volunteer park ranger at Katmai. We're at the Brooks Falls, and we're watching wild brown bears. Right now, we're not 100% sure on the ID of this bear. Seems to be fishing a little bit erratically. Doesn't seem very experienced. He seems just a little big for it to be 503. Maybe it is 503 and he's just been very successful in the last month or so. And he's being successful right now despite his appearance of being a little bit, inexperienced with fishing. So he's kind of behind the trees. I'm gonna pan over. We'll check out what's going on with 151 and 480 Otis. Otis is kind of a famous bear. Really in July, which is one of the peak months, really the peak month for bear viewing at Brooks Camp, Otis was really the star of the show. We could pretty much count on seeing 480 at the falls, sitting right where he's sitting now, just about day in and day out. What was interesting this July is we had, it was a big salmon run. It wasn't like huge. It wasn't unheard of how big it was. But what was interesting about it is, compared to other years, the flow of salmon was very constant. A lot of times you'll see, in previous years, you would see pulses of fish coming up and attempting to clear the falls. So you might have one day where you saw 300 fish jump in 1 minute, and then the next day you see 20 or 30. And then a couple days go by and you see another 300 fish jumping per minute. This year, it was just absolutely steady. We saw 100, 200, 300 fish jumping per minute for weeks at a time. And because of that, because there were so many fish, the bears would show up, catch as many fish as they could possibly fit in their stomachs, and then they'd have to go off and take a nap and take a little break from fishing. So because of that, we didn't see quite as many bears at the falls all at one time. We still saw about the same number of individuals, which was about 30 individual bears, but they weren't all at the falls at the same time as frequently, again, because they could just fill up on salmon so fast, and then they got to go take a nap. You can only eat so much. A bear can eat a tremendous amount of salmon. We did see, we counted 480 eating 44 fish in about 7 hours, which is just incredible. Each salmon contains about 4,500 calories. And I think I say this just about every single play-by-play, so I'm sorry for being a broken record for those of you that have heard me say this a million times, but each salmon is about 9 cheeseburgers. So 44 times 9 gets upwards of 300 cheeseburgers in equivalent to calories that this bear ate in a single day, in less than a day, in 7 hours. And so it's likely that he caught and ate even more than that. And when the bears are able to catch that many fish, and the fishing's that good, a lot of times they won't eat the whole fish. But a 480, like I mentioned earlier, is missing 2 of his canine teeth. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for him to be economical, just eat the skin or just eat the brain. So he ended up eating a lot of the meat, the fillets, the part we like, even though he probably would have preferred just to eat the skin. So probably eating more of each fish than another bear would have that ate that many. And now we have a 4th bear. So really quite a bit of action going on right now. So this is not the same bear that we were looking at a few moments ago. Once this bear stops moving around so much, I'll zoom into that other bear so we can see that it's not the same one. Looks very similar. So this is the new bear that showed up, and the one we had been looking at a moment ago is hanging out just above the riffles. So it looks like he or she, whatever sex this bear is, not particularly comfortable hanging out at the falls with so many other bears around. But we'll see. Maybe they'll come back and kind of relax a little bit. Of course, just as I said, this bear's not comfortable hanging out at the falls. Shows back up again. And that move that we just saw, jumping into the water, kind of doing a belly flop, we call that the dash and grab. There's a few different fishing techniques that bears will utilize. Running and jumping, trying to pounce on a fish. And along with her are some cubs. So these are spring cubs. Cubs that were born just this past winter. And right now they're learning from their mother. They're learning how to fish. They're learning how to behave around other bears, learning how to behave around people even. So the falls is really not a particularly safe place to bring your cubs, and bears will oftentimes avoid this area, but so the falls is really not a particularly safe place to bring your cubs, and bears will oftentimes avoid this area, but if the reward outweighs the risk, they think it's going to be worth it to. We've seen a few other mother bears do that as well. One of the bears we've seen do that, we don't have a number for. One of the sows, we've been calling them the two cubs, Salt and Pepper, or the Yin Yang twins, because one's a little darker and one's a little lighter, just as kind of a place name. And this bear that came by now didn't really look like that bear to me. It could have been. A big part of the play-by-play, the purpose is to try to help people identify the bears. Right now it's really difficult with all the changes that these bears are going through. So we're all gonna just kind of have to learn as we go at this point. And you know, as we do this, as we continue to see these bears around, we'll be able to compare pictures and study them a little more closely and hopefully get some more concrete identifications. So those cubs we saw just now, just like these other bears, these adult bears, they're also putting on weight for the wintertime. From what we understand, after cubs have left the den for the first time, you know, they'll nurse throughout the summer, but they won't nurse, from what we understand, in the den the following winter. And so it's just as necessary, maybe even more necessary for them to pack on that weight so they can survive their hibernation this coming winter. So adult bears, they can put on consistently 1 to 2 pounds a day over the summertime. Spring cubs can put on even more weight than that. They're nursing from their mother. They're also eating whatever salmon they can scrounge up from their mother, or whatever they can find on their own even. Looks like 151 is taken off. Didn't look like he was really pushed out, maybe just decided to take a break, take a rest, maybe come back later. And we're left with the, again, the star of the show, 480 Otis. So all these bears are different. We don't tag any of the bears. We don't have collars on any of the Brooks River bears. But they all have slight variations. Generally, when we get into the fall months, they'll start turning darker. 480, the bear we're looking at now, doesn't get quite as dark as a lot of the other bears. And that's just kind of one of his unique characteristics. They all behave a little bit differently as well. This is definitely 480's preferred fishing spot. We actually, a lot of people have called this Otis's office, this kind of back corner area. What he's doing is he's sitting and he's waiting for a fish to swim close enough that he can just basically reach down with those powerful jaws and snatch it out of the water, or maybe pounce on it and pin it to the ground. So he's using his eyesight, and he may even feel a fish bump into him as he sits there. I talked a little bit about the dash and grab being a technique, a fishing technique that bears will use. And this technique that we're seeing 480 use is the sit and wait technique. Basically, like I said, just sitting, waiting for a fish to swim by, and then he'll pounce on it. We saw some snorkeling by that younger bear a little earlier. We haven't seen any pirating so far. That would be stealing fish from another bear. Usually done by more aggressive bears than we've seen so far. But definitely one of the most conservative for energy of the fishing techniques is the one we're seeing now, the sit and wait. With that thick layer of fat and the thick, warm fur, these animals can withstand the cold temperatures of the water, and really doesn't take a whole lot of energy for them. Doesn't drain them quite as much as it would you or I. The water's about somewhere around 55 degrees, between 50 and 60 degrees. So it's pretty darn cold. But not too bad for a bear. Especially a big, fat bear like 480.
Still on, or are you finished?
Sometimes in July, as we would watch Otis fish, we could actually see him fall asleep as he's fishing. Kind of speaks to how well he can conserve his energy as he's continuing to take on calories. If you're watching, it may continue to happen this month. It could happen as we watch tonight. But especially in July when it's hot out, when there's just an absolute abundance of fish and he's really full while he's fishing, you'll see his head start to tilt and then he'll catch himself like he's dozing off. And I've watched with binoculars and his eyes really do close for a moment and he snaps back open and wakes up. Oh yeah, I'm here to fish. It's really pretty funny to watch. But 480, Otis, and many of the other bears here on the river, as they continue to come back and capitalize on the easy fishing of the lower river, they'll continue to get even heavier. By the time that 480 goes to hibernate in late October or November, even December, he'll be easily 1,000 pounds. If I had to guess right now, I'd say he's around 800 pounds, maybe even 900 pounds. And they don't, of course, they don't get fat just because they're couch potatoes or just because they like to eat. It's all about survival. If they don't get fat, they don't put on all that weight, they won't survive the winter. Not only is it freezing cold, it can get down to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit out here on a really, really cold snap in the wintertime. But there's just nothing to eat, even if they were to stay awake, if they were to not hibernate. There's just no food, and so now we're seeing them pull in a sockeye salmon, and we'll see if he tries to high grade. Tries to eat just the skin, just those fatty parts of the fish. And even with 2 missing canine teeth, he makes peeling the skin off of that salmon just look easy. Still has a more of a difficult time doing it than a lot of these other bears. But if you or I were to try to muscle the skin off of a salmon, we'd be tugging and pulling and probably be pretty unsuccessful. And he'll likely not eat the whole fish, but none of it gets wasted. The scraps left behind will feed gulls and eagles, kingfisher, other birds. They'll feed other fish as well. A rainbow trout, whitefish, long-nosed suckers. Insects will feed on dead fish carcasses that have been brought up onto the shore. And he's eating it right in the river here, but oftentimes they'll bring it up into the forest, eat their favorite parts, and leave the rest. And a lot of those nutrients will go into the soil, and they'll help plants and trees grow really green and full and lush. And in addition to all that, a lot of the nutrients that don't get brought up on the land, that remain in the water, they'll feed and they'll allow plankton and other small organisms to flourish. Those populations will bloom, and then when the salmon eggs hatch next spring, the alvin that come out, and then as they turn into fry, that's what the fry will eat. They'll also eat, the fry will eat insect larvae, which I'm reminded of as I get torn apart by mosquitoes. We all really like to hate on the biting insects. They're no fun to be around, but without them, we probably wouldn't have such high numbers of salmon, and in turn, we wouldn't have such high numbers of bears as well. I just flipped through the comments real quick, and I noticed somebody asked, do bears drink water? And they do. I've seen them drink water quite a bit, but there's also a lot of water in the salmon itself. So they're able to hydrate by eating, and you also might not notice them drink water quite as much, as they're walking around the river and their heads down. It looks like they're just looking for fish, but a lot of times they'll be lapping up water as they go. might be just a little bit more difficult to catch when there's more of a wide angle shot. But at a time like this, when this bear is sitting fishing, he's really focused, really honed in on his task of catching fish for his survival. The bears are incredibly determined, they're incredibly patient. I've talked about their intelligence quite a bit, but they're really skilled as well. There's not necessarily, you know, they have claws, they have big teeth, but there's not anything really that should make them any better at pouncing on fish than us. You know, if I wanted to go sit in the water and jump at every fish that swam by, I could certainly try, but I don't think I'd be quite as successful. My coordination isn't going to be as good as a bear. My speed isn't going to be as good as a bear. And those aren't things that are derived by its size. It's just good at what it does. And of course, those kind of personality traits of a brown bear, that's a big part of what makes it good too. It's just patient. So that last fish we saw him catch was a sockeye. Now he's going to chow down on this silver salmon. Probably going to have a lot more calories in this fish than the previous one. That red sockeye salmon, it had already used up a lot of its fat. It was already pretty far along in its journey to spawn. Whereas this silver salmon is going to have a little more meat on its bones, essentially. So like I said, this is a silver salmon that 480 is eating right now, and the silvers probably won't be around for too much longer. We've stopped seeing them in the lower river down by the floating bridge. We might see one or two occasionally, and it's possible that we'll have another burst of silvers come through, but it's been about 4 days now and I haven't seen any real significant number of silver salmon swimming up past the floating bridge anymore. So it's likely that pretty soon we'll stop seeing bears at the falls and we'll start seeing them more down in the lower river, waiting for those sockeye salmon that have already come through. Maybe they came through earlier in the season. They were some of the first to arrive and they've spawned and they're now dying and floating back down the river. We'll also, what I kind of suspect will happen is we'll see some more bears in the upper river, up above the falls, because there's still an absolute ton of sockeye salmon that are still swimming up from the top of the falls. They've already passed the falls, and then they're still traveling to Lake Brooks. So what I suspect is we'll see quite a few bears walking that stretch of river, fishing there as well. Can't be certain, of course. These are wild animals with minds of their own. But it's always fun to speculate as to how the next few weeks will go. Seasons, you know, they change incredibly fast here in Alaska. It seems like just a few days ago we were just getting started with the summer, and now we're moving into fall. Maybe a third of the way into the fall already. Kind of reminds you to take advantage of every moment you have and really enjoy each experience and, you know, live it. A lot of times I'll be taking photos or taking videos, and I just have to step back and really live and experience what's around me instead of trying to capture it and save it for later. Kind of reminds me that it's our centennial year in the National Park Service. So we're celebrating 100 years that the Park Service has been around and been working to protect animals like brown bears, places like Katmai National Park, and providing those experiences for people to enjoy, be inspired from, to learn from. But we're also looking forward to the next 100 years. We want to continue that tradition of stewardship. We want to continue protecting places like Katmai. We want to designate more places to be national parks. We want to increase the number of places that we protect. And we also, you know, we want to be better stewards. The last 100 years has been awesome, but it certainly hasn't been perfect. We're always getting better. We're always learning things. We're always changing our behavior. And we want to continue to do that for the better. We're in kind of I think, a pivotal time in human history where we're growing a lot, and sometimes we see growing pains. And so we all kind of need, I think, to work together to try to fix some of the problems that we've encountered, some of the things, you know, problems that we've even created. And to work together to make sure that places like this, places like Katmai, that they'll be around 100 years from now, 200 years from now. I don't know where we'd be if we didn't have places like this. I met a couple that was traveling all around the country this year, visiting every single national park in 1 year, traveling around in an RV. I thought that was awesome. That was really inspired me to want to go out and see more places. Of course, not everybody can hop in an RV and go visit every single national park, so you know, there's lots of different ways to celebrate. Lots of different ways to do your part, and you know, part of what you're doing right now is just that. Places like Katmai would not exist if people didn't care about them, if people didn't enjoy them. And by watching the cams on Explore, you're doing that. You're enjoying One of the most amazing places in the world. But the National Park Service invites you to find your park this year, visit some places near and dear to you, and also to spread the word, we want to get young people in our parks too, because they're the ones that are going to be around for the next 100 years. So if you can show your kids, show your grandkids, show your nieces and nephews all this cool stuff that you get to see on Explore, if you can take them to a nearby park, if you can maybe show them pictures of recent trips that you've taken, it's all, it's all part of the answer. And there's other big things we can do too. You can volunteer in your parks, you can donate to your parks, and you can do kind of some of these larger scale things, because it's not necessarily just our parks that we want to protect, it's the whole world. It's part of everything that we do. Everything we do affects the world in some way. I mentioned in our last play-by-play that we really vote with our dollars when we support industries that are really good for the planet. That really helps. When we support industries that are not so good for the planet, that does the opposite. What we eat also has a huge impact on the environment. Vegetables are very healthy. They're great. They're also really good for the environment. It takes a lot less energy to produce vegetables than it does to produce things like beef or other animal products. We can't all eat rice and lentils for every meal of the day, but I think the more vegetables you can put in your diet, it'll be healthier, you'll feel good, but it'll also actually help the environment, help the planet grow. And they'll help animals like 480 Otis. In a way. So it's been about an hour. I'm going to call it a day for tonight. I'll return you all to the normal feed. I hope you can continue to watch and be inspired. I've talked a lot about how intelligent these animals are. And it's something that I think about every time I watch them. I hope you can all be inspired by that as well. I'm sure you already are in a lot of ways. So I'll have a few more play-by-plays getting set up in the next week. We're going to release a tentative schedule for our different live events for the remainder of the season. Of course, that'll be subject to change as things come up, but we want to give you guys a bit of an idea as to what's to come for the remainder of our time in Brooks Camp.